Okay, so we are going to cover section 3.1. We're starting out this chapter, this unit 3, with decimals. And the first thing that we want to talk about are place values, so we can make sure that we communicate and we state what the decimal is that you have correctly. And so I want to show you this place value chart. And you'll notice that this point right here that we have is actually the decimal point. That's what we're referring to. So these would be the whole numbers that you're typically used to seeing. So an age, a quantity that you would be measuring out, so like 1 cup, all of these are whole numbers and they're going to be on the left side of the decimal point. Any fraction that you've been talking about, or piece of a whole, so let's say 2/3. 2/3 is actually a decimal point number, and so these numbers that are part of a whole, or a fraction obviously, would be represented as a decimal on the right side of the decimal point. So we're going to go through a couple of examples, and I'm going to use this same chart that we have here to fill them in. So if I have the decimal 0.1, well, what I see is I see 1, so I'm going to say 1, and then after I read or say what number I see, then I'm going to read the place value. And so it's 1, oops, sorry, if I could spell that would be great. 1 is the number that I see, and 10th is the place value of where this number sits on this place value chart. So I would read 0.1 as 1/10. Okay, let's try another one. If I have this number, I still see the number 1. 0, 1 is not a numerical value, right? It's just kind of a placeholder that 0 is. So I see 1, and what place value is it? It's hundredths. So I have 1/100th. Notice that the TH part of all of these, they match on the other side, tens, hundreds, thousands, but they get the TH, and that TH tells us that it's a decimal. It's to the right of this decimal point, are the place values that we're referring to. Do you need to remember these? Yes. If you do not know these and you cannot commit these to memory, this may be something that you need to put on your note card. But you will have to know these place values that you see right here on this chart on the screen. You'll need to know those for your test. So the last one I'm going to do for you here is going to be this number. What do I see? Well, I see 0, 0, 1, which is actually just 1. So I say 1. After I read what I see, then I go look at the place value. And so I have 1,000th. Got a TH at the end, so 1,000th. This represents the number decimal place or number decimal that you see right there. Okay, so not only can we learn to read and communicate with common language about decimals, but we're also going to get a big number, have to identify what number place value each of the numbers are that it asks you for in a homework problem. So for example, we have 5,358 and 421 thousandths. So in this problem, they gave us a number and they asked us what place value is the 2 in. Well, the way that you could find this out is you could go up here and you could write in all of the numbers and see which one fits that it's asking us about. Well, it asked us about the 2, and so the 2 is in the hundredths position. So the hundredths is going to be your answer here, because it asked you what place value is the number 2 in. So you wrote it in, or you went through and you identified that it's in the hundredths column. Okay. Let's try this next one. It's going to give you a decimal, and it's going to ask you not only what is the fraction for this, but it's going to ask you what to write it out into words. So we start this by flipping back to the screen, and we need to know what fraction or what place value it's in. So, sorry, wrong way. So I have decimal 5, decimal 5, and so I go back over here and I look, if I have decimal 5, I know that I have 5/10. So if I have 5/10, that's what the wording is. But if I need to, sorry, it's a THS. If I need to write it as a fraction, this is what I write, 5/10, 5/10. And so now I was able to not only take a decimal and write it into words and be able to say it with the right language, but I was also able to write it as a fraction because I wrote exactly what you said. 5 is my numerator and tenths, 10, is my denominator. Okay, let's try that again. 62 is what I hear or what I say, right? That's what I see. And the place value that I have here, tenths, hundredths, is my denominator. How do I read this? I say 62 hundredths. How do I know that? Because I go back to this chart, I fill it in with 0.62. I read what I see, 62, and it's in the hundredths column, 62 hundredths. How do I know what my fraction was? I put what I see as my numerator and what I say as a place value as my denominator. Okay, we're going to do one a little bit longer. This is a decimal point. Oops, sorry, 347. So what do I see? I see 347. What I see is my numerator. The place values, tenths, hundredths, thousandths. Thousandths is my denominator. If I was going to write it in words, I would write what I see. So 347, right? And then this is thousandths. So 347 thousandths. Okay. What happens if we have a whole number and a decimal? Well, for this one, it's going to be 82, and we represent with words the decimal with the word and. So notice back here, there was no and in this. It's not 347, it's 347. The and represents a decimal point, and so this is something that's really hard for students. So 82, and for my decimal, 46, and it's tenths, hundredths. If I was to write this as a mixed number, I know it's a mixed number because I have a whole number and a fraction. Remember, any decimal is a fraction. So this became 82, 46 is what I see, and tenths, hundredths is my fraction. If you could simplify this, then you would. You could divide the top and bottom both by 2 for sure, and you could keep dividing by 2 until you got the simplest fraction that you could. This is the same thing that we were doing in the last chapter, just simplifying fractions. Okay, we'll keep going here. All right, so what if we started with a fraction and wanted to go to a decimal? Well, this is actually the easier part of this. You read from top to bottom, so you take 3 divided by 8 in your calculator, and it gives you 0.375. 0.375 is not how I want you to read that. I want you to read what you see. So we say 375 tenths, hundredths, thousandths. So, sorry. Thousandths. So how did we do it? We took the fraction. Remember, this sign right here means divide. And so I took 3 divided by 8, put it in my calculator, and it spit me out a decimal. And for me to read it, I would say, read what I see, and then read the place value, tenths, hundredths, thousandths. Okay, let's try one more of those. What if I have a mixed number? Okay, I can't divide like I did here. I can't divide the top number divided by the bottom number because I have a mixed number. So for me to be able to get it into that format, I need to use the backwards C. So 4 times 32 plus 3 equals my numerator, and it's all over 4. It stays the same. And so if I'm working this problem and I multiply and then I add the 3, I end up with 131 over 4. So now I'm at the exact same problem that I just solved, right? I need to know what it is that does a decimal, and so I used a divide sign, right? This fraction bar means divide. So I take 131 divided by 4 in my calculator, and when I do that, I end up with 32.75. Well, what do we know? What did we figure out here? It may not be important to change at all because we ended up with 32 and we still got 32 as my whole number. And the fraction, 3 divided by 4, is where the 0.75 came from. So if you realize that a whole number stays as a whole number on the left side of the decimal and your fraction is what goes on the right side, you can easily just put 3 divided by 4 in your calculator to get your 0.75, and then you would have your answer for that. If what I just explained doesn't make sense, then use the backwards C format that we've been talking about and go through this step right here to get your 131 and divide it by 4, and you're still going to get the same answer, okay? All right, the next thing that we need to do is we need to take our comparing fractions one step further. Before we were comparing fractions, we're going to take our decimals one step further. Before in the previous unit, we've been comparing fractions, and in this one we're going to compare whole numbers and decimals, or just decimals. So what I need you to know, as long as you have the same exact number of digits on both sides of the decimal point, then you are able to compare them. So for example, if we go and we see that 10 and 10 are the same, okay, we could technically mark them out if we wanted to and just look at the numbers on the other side of the decimal. And so what I have is I have 0.5 and 0.7. They both are one digit, right? They're both in the tenths position. So for comparing practices, we can actually get rid of the decimals and we can compare, is 5 bigger than 7? Well, no, obviously. So the little mouth is going to eat the 7, right? And so we find that 10 and 7 tenths is bigger than 10 and 5 tenths, okay? How come I could do that? Because before the decimal matched on the left side, they were both in the same place value. They were both in the tenths position, meaning there's only one digit in both of those. And since those are same number of digits in the same place value, I could get rid of the decimal places here and just compare the whole numbers. And it's much easier for us to look at whole numbers and decide which one's bigger than it is to look at decimals. So this is my answer for this one. All right, let's try another one. This one is a little bit different. So this is 5.678 and 5.6. So I'm comparing both of these. I told you to look before the decimal, and I see a 5 and I see a 5. They are identical, so I'm just going to mark them out so they're not distracting me. I want you to see that here's my decimal place on both of these. It's after that 5. And so I have 1, 2, 3 place values here, and only one of 3 place values on the right side here. And so if I can have the same number of place values, I can get rid of the decimals and I can just look at these numbers as whole numbers. So if I don't have them, I'm just going to put zeros in as placeholders. So now I'm dealing with 678 versus 600. Which one is bigger? Well, it looks like this one. If I had money, I would want to have $678 versus $600. So this is going to be a greater than symbol. How was I able to do that? The numbers in front of the decimal point matched, so I just kind of ignore them for right now. And then I looked for the same number of place values. If I didn't have all the place values, I put zeros in as placeholders and then compared the two numbers. All right, so we're going to talk about rounding. I'm going to put a number up here. And it asks you to round to the nearest tenth. So you find your tenth position, and we know that this is tenths. The TH, right, tells me as a decimal. So this is what I'm looking at, this tenths. I'm going to draw my line after it. Oops, there we go. To show you that everything on the left side is what I'm going to have in my answer. The things on the right side are going to help us round up or stay the same, but they're going to drop off when I write my final answer. So my final answer is going to have these right here filled in on the left side. So to do that, I have to look at this 8. And the rules are, if it's, I guess, 0 to 4, it's going to stay the same. And if it's 5 or more, it's going to add 1, or round up, is what we have said growing up in the past from elementary school. but I want you to see that it really just means to add 1 when we round up. So 8 falls into this category down here, so we are going to add 1. And when I add 1, I end up with 5. And so 6.5 or 6 5/10 is my final answer for this one. Okay, let's try another one. Sorry, gotta find a round one. We're gonna do 7, that's a decimal. Okay, we're also rounding to the nearest 10th here. So I'm gonna find my 10th, I'm gonna draw my line. I'm gonna show you that this on this side is gonna be what I have. Why could I write the 7? Because I know that if I added 1 to the 3, it's gonna only make it 4, and if I stayed the same, it would be a 3. So I'm not actually gonna have to carry and make this become an 8. So I look here at this guy, I see a 5, and the 5 makes me add 1, right? Because it's that 5 or more category. And so if I add a 5 or add 1 to that 3, I end up with 7.4. So I rounded to the nearest 10th by finding the 10th position and looking to the number just to the right of my position we're rounding to. Okay, let's do this. And we're going to round to the nearest hundredths. Tenths, hundredths. I'm going to draw my line. So my answer is going to have this in it. I look at this 4 and I decide, am I going to round up by adding 1 or am I going to stay the same? And I'm going to stay the same, so I just recopy these down. Why am I staying the same? Because this is that 0 to 4, and 0 to 4 as this number on the outside stays the same instead of adding 1 to it. All right, we're going to start talking about some fractions here a little bit and some pictures to help us make some of this make sense. So my first problem that I'm going to do here is a number line. This guy is 1. This guy is 0. Okay, pretend like those are perfectly even there. And I want you to see that they are calling this point right here A. So it wants to know A is equal to what fraction? So I want you to see that this whole thing right here is equal to 1 whole, right? Because it told you that. Now, for a lot of my students, this doesn't make a whole lot of sense, and it's really, really difficult for them to see. But if I drew it like this, and I made this become a rectangle box for you, right, that you've seen in the past, and I went ahead and made these lines a little bit better, and A is to here, right? So A is this, and this, and this, and this, but not this last one. Does everybody see that? So A is a numerator of 1, 2, 3, 4 items shaded in out of how many possible? Well, we see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So A is the same thing as 4 out of 5 pieces. But in this chapter, remember, we're not dealing with fractions anymore. We're dealing with decimal points. And so it wants to know what's the decimal for this. Well, I've already showed you that this is just a division problem. You take your top number divided by your bottom number. Why do we do that? Because we read from top to bottom and you find a decimal point of 0.80. Okay? All right, so that covers everything that we need to know to be able to successfully cover and complete section 3.1. Now you need to make sure you work on your try on your own problems and ask me questions where you are struggling.